The very beginning of March, and I was thinking about making a video about winter dieback. And I was examining my Celeste tree. There we go. I'll make you a trade.
There
you
go. Say hi. She said, I want to go play with my frisbee.
Ah, you're the cutest thing in the world.
She wants to play with the frisbee. We're going to go.
Anyway, I was examining my Celeste tree, and I was just checking it the way I do to see if it survived the winter or if it was damaged a little. I don't see any winter damage at all. But this tree is an exception because it's a larger tree and it has a microclimate next to the house. Of course, it's Celeste, which is, in my opinion, the most winter hardy fig variety I've ever grown out of the 100 or so that I've grown over the years. And also, because it is an older tree, there's a lot of wood around the pulp, which I'm going to show you in a little bit, an example of that. And wood is a very, very, very good insulator. So you can always pretty much rely on the fact that a larger tree, one with thicker branches and a thicker trunk, is going to withstand the cold much better than a smaller, flimsy tree and doesn't have as much wood, a very good insulator, around the pulp. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is because, and I'll explain that in a little while rather than explain it now. But there are different methods that you can use to try to determine, sort of at the end of winter or when the most severe weather is over with, and in the beginning of March, the most severe weather generally is over with. There are ways that you can kind of look, but I want to dispel this notion that you can really tell whether or not a tree has sustained a lot of damage. It's very difficult, and I'll explain why in a second. But you can always take a knife and you can scrape. Let me show you. And you can look at that. You can see the color green. There are different shades of green that you look for. All right. And I sort of know because I have done it for a long time. And that one looks good and green, so that would be a test. But you cannot count on that test entirely. You have to really examine the ends of the branches, try to break off a piece, and there are some other telltale signs that you can look for. But still, you're not going to really know until spring the extent of the damage, whether or not it received a lethal dose of cold and there's going to be extensive dieback, or whether that dieback is going to be partial or just the tips or none at all. You're not going to really be able to assess that until much later in the season, in the spring. And let me explain why. If you've received cuttings, you know that you can take the cuttings and they've been completely severed from the tree and put them in the refrigerator, and they're going to last a long time, maybe a couple of months, and then you can put them in the ground or whatever you're going to do, and you're going to propagate that particular variety. They don't dry out immediately. They just don't. And especially if the pulpwood isn't completely damaged. Okay, here's another. You can see it's pretty green. This particular variety is a work, and the parent of it is Celeste, and it's fairly winter hardy. And this one does not appear to me. It's flexible. I'm looking at the Breba. The Breba look like they're okay, but again, it's a microclimate. But the pulpwood can be damaged, which is more susceptible to the cold. It's really the problem, the culprit, when it comes to dieback. It's not the wood that surrounds the pulp. It's more the pulpwood, in my experience. And that pulpwood is more moist and is more susceptible to freezing And it's unique to certain trees. It's unique to fig trees. A fig tree has pulp wood. Apple and other fruits don't have pulp wood. And other trees and oak trees and things like that. But we're going to take a look at the pulp wood, and I'm going to show you why I think that figs are so susceptible to the cold. It's not so much the outer wood, which serves as an insulator, than it is the inner wood. Now the outer wood, again, getting back to the thicker the trunk and the thicker the branches, the more insulation you have. The reason why is when it dips down 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning for a little period of time, and maybe goes to 12 degrees or 10 degrees or 8 degrees or something like that, it takes a while for that cold to permeate a thick piece of wood or a thick trunk like down there. Okay, it takes a while for it to permeate. You've seen log cabins and how well insulated they are, or maybe you've been next to a campfire and you place a stick in the fire and you're burning the end of the fire, but guess what? You can hold on to that stick. You know, I've had, and it won't burn you. And I have a wood stove. I burnt for, 42 years here in this state. And in Alaska before that. And I've reached in a wood stove and moved the wood around sometimes. And sometimes I'll just grab the end of the wood where I see it's not burned and just push it around or move around with my hand. And it's not hot. It's only hot where it's burning. It's amazing. It's an amazing substance. And so when it gets really cold at night and it dips down just for a couple of hours, those early morning hours, the cold doesn't have a chance to penetrate all the way into the pulp. Okay? And that really helps. Now you might not think one time that would help, but over the course of the winter, that really helps because those really, really early morning dips are protected by the wood around the pulp. And the more wood, the more protection, the more insulation. And then when the temperature rises quickly, when the sun comes out in the morning, okay, the cold just stops its penetration, dead in its tracks. And it doesn't really do as much damage or any damage to the pulp wood, which we're going to examine. All right, I think I'll grab my hat here. It's kind of cold, kind of nasty. Something happened this year that is unique, and I want to talk about it quickly. I was distracted in the fall. I had some emergencies that I had to deal with, and I was away for a little bit, and I didn't get a chance to really wrap my trees, but I had been thinking about the FIGBUSTERS series, and in that series I wanted to put a video, or make a video, about winter dieback. So I thought, you know what, the last 2 years I didn't have any winter damage at all, because it's been so mild. And I thought, well, maybe I'll get away with this again. Why not take a chance? Three's the charm. I don't know. But then I thought about the FIGBUSTERS, and I said, well, no matter what happens, it's not likely that 3 years in a row there won't be any damage, because I've never experienced that in all of the many years that I've grown figs. You can have a couple mild winters, and then all of a sudden, boom, winter comes and it just kills them right to the ground because you didn't cover them. And that's going to happen to me too. Okay, but this time I wanted to see what would happen, and I thought, well, I'll make this FIGBUSTERS video, and we will see, because I have so many varieties here, as you can see, and they're all over the yard. They're way back in the, they're all on the high parts of my yard, because I do not grow figs anywhere where it is the lower areas of the property. I've always grown my figs on the very highest ground I can find. And if it's not high enough and I need to get a variety somewhere, I'll put a raised bed. And you can do that too. And as long as you plant in the center of the raised bed, I'm not a big fan of placing figs in raised beds, but if you put it in the center of the raised bed, like I have one way back near the sheds, I might show you later, the winter kill, you know, it won't be real cold around the roots because it's a big raised bed, it's in the center, and you'll be fine. And as far as in the summertime, it might be a little drier, but that's good. You can always add water, you can't take it away. If you plant in the lower part of the ground, there's no way that you can dry out the ground. And when your harvest comes to fruition, all of a sudden you're having problems with your figs cracking and splitting and rotting and being of lower quality, and you're thinking, oh, this variety is not good, I don't want to grow this variety anymore. Hey, wait, maybe it's not the variety, maybe it's the location of the variety, because many varieties that have a bad reputation in ground for cracking and so on and so forth, they do perfectly well. They really do well. I once had a Brunswick here on the high ground, and I had some of the most delicious figs, because Brunswick is one of the most delicious figs. It's very unique, and it gives you a first crop and a second crop. But eventually I put other varieties here, Peter's Honey, and more desirable varieties, because when it rains really hard during the harvest, Brunswick will rot, it will crack and split. It does have that quality. But again, you can ameliorate that bad quality by placing it on high ground. And as a general rule, it's a good idea, in my opinion, to place all of your figs, your in-ground figs, on the highest ground that you can possibly plant them, okay? When you do that, you avoid a lot of unnecessary negative characteristics. So just trying to keep that in mind. It's worked for me. But we have all these different varieties, and we're going to be able to tell later on, because there's going to be videos. I'm going to make a succession of videos, 4, 5, 6, however many I really have to do, as we progress through this to the spring and into the growing season. And when these trees come to fruition, we're going to see how many varieties were damaged, if they were just the tips were damaged, if they were halfway down damaged, if they were all the way down to the ground damaged. As far as the roots, once again, another reason why not to plant your trees in low spots, because low spots will get wet in the wintertime. The roots will be soggy, they're starved for oxygen, and you're going to get a lot of dieback, or the tree's going to die. And that's the only time I've ever lost a tree, as far as the roots included. Roots are very tolerable, and I'm in 7A. There's been occasions out here in the country where I've gotten down to 0 or 1 or 2 below. Generally 5 degrees is a cold winter here, but something extraordinary happened this season. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But don't plant your trees in low spots, because they're starved for oxygen, they'll be too wet, and they're die more frequently. Again, high ground, as high as you can have. If you don't have high ground, you want to put a couple trees, put some raised beds in, and it will work really well. Okay, so let's talk about the Pulp Wood. We will check these varieties extensively and in detail, and we're going to see, because I've got trees behind the barn, I've got trees over there, I've got trees everywhere. Okay, and again, all the high parts. So we're going to talk about these varieties. We're really going to examine them in detail right on through the fruiting season to see which ones held up the best and which ones might not have. Now, I have a couple experiments going on. I have an experiment in 7B, and I have an experiment here with Smith. And this is, again, 7A. This is a tree that you will have seen in my videos in the greenhouse and out here in the ground, where I've planted it several years in my grow bag, using my grow bag method. You can see the grow bag is down there still. This year I didn't dig it up. I won't go into the grow bag method because I've already done that in my other videos. So you can look at those videos if you like. But it's a method for protecting trees in the wintertime. I dig them up, and then I put them back in the spring in the same hole. And I like the characteristics of the tree because they taste better in the ground. And, well, you can watch my videos if you want to try that technique. This time I didn't dig it up. This is a Smith. You will see it in my other videos. It's very, very, very productive. A very healthy tree. I love this tree. This tree was just a cutting that had just started when I bought it. And it grew into a lovely, beautiful tree. And I've made other trees since then. And this one is very, very healthy, and I love it. But I thought I'd risk it this time, because again, the roots are seldom damaged. Believe me, your tree can die all the way to the ground, but it will probably sprout shoots in the spring from the roots. You can mulch the ground. I haven't mulched these trees at all. okay? I generally never mulch my trees ever. Never. Not in the greenhouse, not in pots, not in the ground, ever, except for in the wintertime. This time I did not do that either because I wasn't here when I needed to do it. And then I thought about making this series. And so we're going to see what happens when you don't mulch in the wintertime. But mulching in the wintertime is a good idea. A little mulch, not too much, okay? But here I cut this tree back. It was a beautiful tree, and I made a lot of cuttings, okay? So if you're wondering what happened here, in the fall, I cut this back, and I put the cuttings in the refrigerator and sealed them up, and I'm going to grow a bunch of these trees. So let's take a look at the pulpwood, which I mentioned earlier. There we are, okay? Here you can see what distinguishes a fig tree from other types of trees. Some trees have this, but not many. There's the pulp, and it's quite a bit. I mean, it's almost half of the diameter, or half of the area of the branch. It's a big part of the branch, and I believe that pulpwood is the culprit when it comes to winter dieback. It's not the wood so much; it is the pulpwood, and because it is higher in its concentration of water, it's more moist. It's more susceptible to freezing, and probably for other reasons that I don't understand, the pulpwood is more susceptible to winter cold. And this is what I was telling you about. The larger the wood around the pulpwood, the more insulation that you have on those really cold nights when the temperature dips down 2 or 3 in the morning, and it might go down to 8 degrees, you know, and it takes a while for that cold to permeate the wood, because it's such a great insulator. Even if it's windy outside, it protects it. It protects that pulpwood. And that's why older trees and bigger trees can sustain the cold much better than younger plants that are much more susceptible. That's my opinion, okay? So it's the pulp. And remember, when I've read what I consider to be unreasonable and really, honestly, outlandish claims about, oh, this fig tree can go down to 0 degrees. No, it can't. It can't go down to 0 degrees. Not consistently, it can't. I mean, there might be one instance, and I won't even say, there might be one instance of an unprotected tree because it's in a microclimate, because it's up against a house, or because it's a cold flash that comes in, and it's a very brief, and then the next day is warm and the sun comes out and it warms things up, and maybe it didn't sustain too much damage because it wasn't cold the days before that, and the cold was permeating the wood like I was explaining earlier. There's always a reason, and there are exceptions, but as a rule, that's just not true. And why? I'm going to explain why right now. Here we go. I love this part. You hear me saying this a lot. You see, it's a fig tree. A fig tree is a fig tree is a fig tree. A fig is a fig is a fig. It's a fig. It has pulpwood. It's different. It's not a persimmon tree. It's not an oak tree. It's a fig tree. And no matter what anybody claims, I can tell you, you cannot change the biology of a fig tree just because you want to, or make a claim in order to sell a fig tree, or whatever your motives are, okay, whatever your agenda. You can't change the biology of a fig tree. A fig tree is a fig tree. Now, there are some variations in nature, and because of certain rules of nature, the survival of the fittest and so on and so forth, which I believe in completely, okay, certain varieties that lived in colder regions like the Mount Etnas and things of that nature, or whatever the reason might be, okay, it could be just a genetic quirk, I don't know, but and some of the growers back then, 2,000 years ago said, hey, look at that one. That one did pretty good in the cold. It survived a little better than the others. And they selected it. They selected, survival of the fittest sort of thing. Natural selection is one way of selecting. Nature does that. And then there's human selection, just like with dogs. And you change dogs and change horse breeds. And you change grapes and things. Okay, human selection is a real thing. Okay, and so the grower might have said, oh, that tree did really well during the frost, and I'm going to propagate that tree. And because of the characteristic that we don't fully understand, there might be some minor variation, and that tree does a little better than other fig trees. And that's why you have some that have a reputation for being more hardy. But can they go to zero? No. Okay. Is there really a huge spread between varieties that are known to be winter hardy and tender varieties like Black Madeira or a Smith or Italian 258 or some of the prima donna figs? Is there really a big difference? I mean, a big spread in degrees Fahrenheit from how cold a certain tolerant tree can tolerate the cold, like Hardy Chicago or something like that, okay? Or Celeste, which is a better, I think, example, and a tender tree like Italian 258. Is there a big spread? In my opinion, no. There absolutely is not. I would think that it's about 10 degrees in my experience. Now, that is a lot. I mean, it's not a little bit. 10 degrees. I mean, perhaps, you know, your Celeste can go down to 10 degrees or maybe 8 degrees. We're going to find out. I'm going to explain why in a second. But, and maybe it's 18 degrees or 15 degrees for Black Madeira. It's about a 10 or Italian 258. Or maybe your Celeste can go down to 10 degrees and your Black Madeira can go down to 20 and maybe sustain that for a few nights, but not consistently, not if you have 1 week after a week after a week of cold weather. Now, something happened, and I need to explain this. I should have explained it in the beginning of the video, but I've got to get moving here. I've got so much to cover. It's so voluminous. You know, there's so much to talk about on this subject, and there's going to be a series of videos on this topic. But something happened, which was an enormous advantage, and I intend to exploit that advantage. And the enormous advantage was that it never went down here in the countryside. It never went down below 10 degrees Fahrenheit, ever. It's an amazing foundation to use for this video because now we have a reference point. Now, it didn't go down lower than that, so we can't really talk too much about lower than that. But I've had other seasons we'll talk about, and maybe next year we can talk about that again. Maybe it'll go down to 8 degrees or go down to 5 degrees next year, and we'll see what it does to certain varieties. By the way, if you're looking at this, here's some winter kill, and this is an Adriatic type, which is more susceptible to the cold than many others. And I can see the ends are breaking off easily, and they have dried out already because they probably got damaged earlier in the season. Okay, there's a lot of variables. You can't always tell. Sometimes you can tell. It depends on how tender the variety is or when it got damaged. If it was damaged in maybe a cold flash in November or early December. Okay, so some of the variables that we want. Let's go back to the 10 degrees. It's a wonderful opportunity, a fantastic opportunity, because we have this now as a reference point. We are going to be able to see all these different varieties. And in a typical winter, when you had a lot of winds and you had cold and you had snow and you had snow cover and rain and everything else, which you can't really replicate in a laboratory, you can't do it. Okay, and it did go down in the 10 area about 3 different times. It wasn't real success. It wasn't like it lasted for a week and every morning at 3 in the morning it went down to 10 degrees. I think the most it went down around 10 or 11, 12 was 3 times in one cold snap, and the other times it was only 1 or 2 nights. So it's a beautiful, beautiful, really, experience that we can talk about, so that we're going to be able to sort all this out once and for all and figure out what varieties can withstand 10 degrees Fahrenheit in 7A in a somewhat typical winter. It was kind of cold. It was kind of brutal, but it never got real cold. It's perfect. It's a perfect situation for doing this. And I'm going to later go to each variety. We're going to talk about the varieties, and we're going to see what kind of damage they sustained. Okay? It's going to be fun. Now, remember, there are certain variables that I do want to mention before I close this video. And some of those variables, again, how high is your fig tree planted? Okay, is it mulched or not? Okay, is it covered? Of course. Is there a microclimate? Of course, that for sure is a significant variable. How old the trees are, how mature they are, how large the trunks are and the branches for protection and insulation. That's a very important factor. When did the cold come during the winter? Did it come later in the winter? Did you not get a real early cold snap before the trees were completely dormant? That's a very important consideration. Did the cold, the real cold of the winter come later when the trees were completely asleep and dormant? A very, very significant variable. These are all things that are important that you need to consider. And we're going to talk about these things in the next videos, one by one. So I hope you're interested in the FIGBUSTERS series. It's not going to be just about winter kill or dieback. It's going to be about a bunch of subjects that I've been wanting to talk about. Some things I want to clarify, or some things that I feel are perhaps misrepresentations, or I may not agree with. It might not be my opinion. Remember, always apply cynicism, always be the skeptic, and always try to make your own mind up. Don't be fooled. Look at the evidence, examine the evidence, and try to struggle for the truth. Sometimes the truth is a bit ambiguous, but eventually it shows itself. And that's what we're going to try to do with the FIGBUSTERS series. There's some things I just want to, for the record, to straighten out because I don't agree with. And hey, there might be people out there that disagree with me, and that's okay. That's what it's all about. It's okay to have debate. It's okay to have disagreement. But somebody's right and somebody's wrong about some of these things, and they need to be sorted out. So I think it's a worthy cause. So with that, I think I'm going to close this video. I'm looking forward to the season. I'm looking forward to future videos. I'm looking forward to I hope last year was a great season, and I was able to pick a lot of figs, and I hope I have a season like that again, and I hope you do. I'm looking forward to it. I hope it happens. I hope there's not too much rain or other things happen that cause the quality of the figs to deteriorate. I'm hoping for a good year. So let's hope for that together. Maybe we can make it happen. Hey, you. Here, let me.
Oh.
Hey, come back. All right, here, I'll throw it for you. Okay. All right, well, with that, thanks for visiting. Good day.